Welcome to Exit Like a Boss. I'm going to show you, having helped nearly 800 business owners work through a 21-step process to exit like a boss, how you can do it, what you need to know, the steps you need to take, and what's actually involved in you and your business being able to maximize value and successfully exit like a boss. Hope you enjoy it. In this episode of Exit Like a Boss, we're going to look at something nobody actually likes to talk about: unplanned events. In other words, what happens if? What happens if you get hit by a bus? What happens if your business partner gets seriously ill? What happens if there's a major incident or accident, or even a climate event that affects your business, a flood or a fire or something like that? Unplanned events is actually about planning for the things none of us want to happen. And unfortunately, the statistics tell us in business, this often happens. Now, we're in stage 2 of our process, and stage 2 is actually about protecting the value that we already have established in the business. When we went and did our fact find and did our business insights report, got our valuation and determined exactly what asset we're dealing with, now we're going to hit pause for a moment and make sure that asset is actually protected. Unplanned events, unfortunately, will happen to most business owners in their lifetime. Fortunately for most of us, they're fairly minor and they don't have a massive impact on either us or the business. But for some people, they are quite a significant event, particularly if we're dealing about literally getting hit by a bus or getting seriously ill. Now, the good news is, with the right planning, these can be minimized. Not necessarily the likelihood of them happening, although there is some of that, but certainly minimizing or mitigating the impact of that event, if it does occur, is quite easy to do. It takes a bit of planning and a bit of time and effort and some documentation, but it's actually quite possible to manage unplanned events. And what that's about is really creating certainty around the outcome. If somebody gets hit by a bus as a business owner, literally, that has a big impact. You're a shareholder, you're a director, you're probably an employee of the business, you're actually more likely to be a key person in the business, and therefore all of those things are going to be impacted. Unfortunately for your family, it's also probably going to have a large financial impact. And so we want to look at and think about, how do we minimize the impact of all of that happening? In most cases, we can set up some legal agreements that govern what is actually going to happen if I get hit by a bus. What happens to my shares or my equity ownership in the business? What happens to the income I was taking from the business, because I'm not going to be there anymore to work or to turn up to the office or factory each day? What happens to the ownership structure of the business? The shares that I had in my will may well be left to my spouse or my family. Is that what my business partners necessarily want? Is my family going to want to be in business partnership with them? Are they going to be able to contribute to the business in the same way that I was? And the answer to all of that is most likely no. Therefore, we need to find a better way. What most people put in place is a simple buy-sell agreement. It might well be part of your shareholders agreement or shareholder deed, but it might be a separate document as well. And what that document simply does is transfers the ownership of my shares to the other shareholders, whilst allowing them to pay my family or my estate out for the value of those shares. Now, that sounds really simple, and in fact, it is quite simple legally. What's not simple is how we fund that. If my shares in the business are worth $3 or $4 million, then in most cases, my business partners probably aren't sitting there with $3 or $4 million in a bank account waiting to pay my family for the value of those shares. And that's where insurance often comes in. It's quite easy to get insurance on your life to cover most of, if not all, the cost of those shares, so that when the event occurs, let's say we get hit by a bus, the insurance cover gets paid out to my family, the shares automatically gets transferred to my business partners, and there's certainty of outcome around that. It's all documented, it's all been discussed well before anything happens, and there's no stress around what happens in that situation, in what can often be a very, very stressful and difficult time for everybody that's involved, not just family, but the business as well. Now, that's a bit of preparation, a bit of planning, some legal documentation, perhaps some insurance advice that you need to get in place. I can tell you, I've worked with business owners where that has not been in place, and it has had a major impact, not just on the family and the shareholders, but also on the business itself. Often there's disputes, there's even legal cases, there might be a whole issue around what are the value of the shares and how we're going to pay for them, and that can be quite disruptive to the operation of the business. So not only has there been an unplanned event, but it's had a direct impact on the day-to-day operations of the business. There might be a downturn, there might be a decrease in sales, there might be some major disruption within the business, all of which means the value of that business now is reduced as a result of that event. And it's all avoidable because you can put in place this whole unplanned events step to make sure you have this sorted if and when somebody, a shareholder, a key person or whatever, gets hit by a bus. The other part of that is actually the employee aspect. If you're a key person within the business, if you're the CEO or if you're the major sales generator that's bringing in all the income and something happens to you, you're also going to have an impact on the business itself. And again, this is not all that difficult to solve. We can get some key person insurance in place that says if something happens to this person, then the business will receive $500,000, let's say, to find a replacement, to fund the downturn in sales, to fund the whole process of recruiting a new person and the disruption that's likely to happen on the way through. So unplanned events, as the name says, no one plans for them, but that's actually the problem. We need to stop. Think about the value of the business. Think about what could possibly go wrong in terms of unplanned events, who could get hit by a bus, and what is the impact of that. Now, if you're lucky enough that the impact of that is very little because you've managed to work yourself out of the business and you've got other people in there managing it, then you're in a very lucky position. But that's not often the case. Now, if you're lucky enough to be in a position where you've largely worked yourself out of the business and it's no longer dependent on you, then perhaps you don't need to worry about that aspect as much. But what we know about most business owners is they haven't done that work. The business is still dependent on them, and therefore when that occurs, there is an issue. Working through the unplanned events, making sure you have a strategy and the legal documentation, the insurance or the funding agreement that you need to minimize that risk and ensure it doesn't disrupt the business. Even worse, family, shareholders, etc. Make sure that you have a strategy in place to prevent that. The action item from this episode is to go away and think about what needs to be done. Get some serious advice from a lawyer, a financial planner, insurance broker who can help you with those things, and make sure you've got it ticked off on your list as we look to protect the value of the business on our pathway to exiting like a boss.